is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Indeed, there is a change in title, and the abolition of phenomena is a nod to C.S. Lewis. Now, the voyage among the zombies, I have a friend who got worried at me when I told her that I'm coming to this conference, and started giving me advice. And her latest advice was, she said, be very careful because they might want to suck your soul out. And so she said, make sure that you don't let anybody look into your eyes, or maybe don't look into anybody's eyes. She was not sure. And okay, so just look down, you'll be fine. So if I do that, you know why I'm doing that. So I'm grateful to be here and to be included in this conference on illusionism, even though I think none of the organizers had any illusion about my views about illusionism. I'm rather upset about illusionism, and I'm going to be critical about it. Not.
I think phenomenal realism and illusionism. So illusionism is second.
Yeah. Okay, okay, so I'm going to be critical of illusionism, both on the grounds that I think it's false and unfounded, but also at the end I will try to make a case that there's also something morally corrosive about it, and that it fits into a cultural trend, or a cultural moment of dehumanization of humans, and therefore illusionism, well, it fills me with a certain amount of dread to think about. Now, I'm not 100% sure after Keith's talk, but I still think that that illusionists, the hard illusionists, the ones who are really distinct from phenomenal realist physicalists, who are slightly revisionist about consciousness. So the real ones, the hard illusionists, and I still think that Keith is one of them, deny that we are conscious and that there is anything it's like in the usual sense of the word, to feel sad or to smell lilac, anything of the like. So according to illusionists, in a technical sense, we are all zombies, right? Now, in fact, what I find about illusionism is that it's becoming, it's a well-attended conference, and I have the sense that illusionism is actually spreading across the disciplines, and that's one of the things that worry me. I think it's gathering adherents and forums to air the view, and the more it happens, the more what I feel is the freakish edge of illusionism will become normalized, and the more it will spread, and one can just helplessly watch this phenomenon. It is important to be able to step in the shoes of one's philosophical opponent and see things from a point of view that's in opposition to one's own view. But I feel that stepping in the shoes of the illusionist, that's a step too far. I think there is something almost perverse and unsettling for me to contemplate the idea that there is no phenomenal experience at all. So, so the plan is that instead of arguing for the falsity of illusionism directly, I will talk about the main arguments, the main philosophical motivations for the view. And I trust that the rest will be taken care of by the implausibility of the view. But maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe it no longer seems so implausible. So, but I do think that there is a difference between illusionism and, for example, take the mind-body problem. The main competing views with regard to the mind-body problem is physicalism and property dualism of the sort that respects the causal closure of physics. And neither of these views are in direct conflict of science or any piece of common sense. They are neither one of them are horribly implausible or horribly plausible. But when it comes to illusionism, it's based on a denial of such a foundational aspect of our self-understanding that it's not on a par with its opponent, phenomenal realism. It constitutes it claims that our belief in phenomenal states is a giant hoax, somewhat akin to not quite like, but somewhat akin to the hoax that an evil demon can play on us, conjuring up a world that doesn't exist. So it's something like that. So in the face of this, I want to spread the good news that there is no good reason to hold illusionism, hard illusionism, the view that there are no phenomenal states, that there is nothing it's like in the experiential, in the phenomenal sense, to smell lilac. Okay, so here is the plan. The first part of the talk, I will present a rebuttal of the main philosophical arguments, and I also will present a rebuttal of one of the arguments against phenomenal realist physicalism and for illusionism. So there are these arguments that the illusionist marshals against the type of physicalist who would be a realist about phenomenal states. And I'm going to present a rebuttal of that, thereby defending physicalist phenomenal realism. And the second part, the last part of the paper will be, I will explain why I think that this view is also morally problematic. Okay, so one of the types of argument that is often brought up for why we should become illusionists is the gap arguments. So the gap arguments, I'm not going to rehearse these arguments. The most well-known version of it is the zombie argument. Zombies are conceivable. If zombies are conceivable, they are possible. If zombies are possible, physicalism is false. Therefore, physicalism is false. It has other. There are other related arguments. Jackson's Mary argument, for example, the explanatory gap argument. They are all based on some sort of gap between phenomenal descriptions of people's experience and physical descriptions of the world, their brain states and so on. Okay. So these gaps, according to the argument, provide a priori reasons to reject the existence of a purely physical world where experience occurs, phenomenal experience occurs. Okay, so now I'm going to present why I don't think that these arguments work, why it's perfectly fine to be a physicalist and still a phenomenal realist. Illusionists seem to swallow this argument, but I think that they really shouldn't. Okay, so the response I'm talking about is the well-known phenomenal concept strategy, and I'm going to quickly describe it, and then I'm gonna describe Chalmers' challenge against it and my rebuttal of the rebuttal to, I'm going to explain why I think that the criticisms against the phenomenal concept strategy do not work. So, according to the phenomenal concept strategy, phenomenal concepts involve unique cognitive mechanisms that set them apart and, in fact, isolate them conceptually from scientific concepts, from neurophysiological concepts. But, according to the strategy, there is no reason to not suppose that these phenomenal states, as well as these unique cognitive mechanisms that are applied on these states to form phenomenal concepts, I repeat, there is no reason to suppose that these states and those mechanisms are not fully physical. So the idea is, the unique nature of phenomenal concepts consists in the fact that phenomenal concepts are partly constituted by tokens of the phenomenal experiences that they refer to. And it's in virtue of this relation that the concept refers to it. Now, my preferred understanding of how this works, how could it be that concepts refer to their constituents in virtue of this constitution relationship, is that that the mind employs what I call the mind applies what I call mental quotation mechanisms on phenomenal experience. And mental quotation is a mechanism that takes an experience and turns it into a concept of itself, much like in language, much like a linguistic expression can be turned into a name of itself by linguistic quotation. Oops. Okay, so this is the gist of it, and this is the key of why, this is the key way in which the phenomenal concept strategy explains why we are puzzled by consciousness, why do we come up with the problem intuitions, but it does in a way that's perfectly compatible with physicalism. So when I attend to a sensation of the smell of lilac and form a phenomenal concept of it, I have a substantial grasp of its nature, because it's in terms of what it's like to smell the lilac, in terms of what it's like to smell it, its phenomenal character. Why? Because the concept includes the phenomenal state itself. So if that's the case, then and our grasp of that phenomenal state is direct, then it will also be the case that it will be independent of any causal functional information, unlike, say, in the case of the concept brain state X, it will be independent of any causal or functional information, and therefore information about functioning in the brain won't explain what it's like to smell lilac. Nevertheless, nothing in this story implies that physicalism is not true. Okay, so this is the short version of the phenomenal concept strategy. So a number of people have criticized it, among them David Chalmers in a paper in 2007, presents the proponent of the phenomenal concept strategy with a dilemma. Now, I believe that the criticism is based on a misunderstanding of the strategy, and I will explain that in a minute. So here is the dilemma that Chalmers poses for the proponent of PCS. He says, and this can be a little turgid, but I promise it's not really hard stuff in the end. So he says, if P and not C is conceivable, then C is not physically explicable. And if P and not C is not conceivable, then C cannot explain an epistemic situation. Now, C here is just some claim that there are phenomenal concepts with the features that the proponent of the strategy says they have, right? So that there are phenomenal concepts that are partly constituted, say, by the states they refer to. So if P and not C is conceivable, then C is not physically explicable. And if P and not C is not conceivable, then C cannot explain an epistemic situation. So I'm gonna take our epistemic situation as one in which the gaps occur, in which there are gaps between conceiving of zombies and conceiving of the physical world, and gaps between knowledge of phenomenal states and physical knowledge, and so on. So that's our epistemic situation. Now, so here is my response to this argument. So my response is that Chalmers had failed to recognize that because we can have different conceptualizations of the same fact, these conditionals that he presented the proponent of PCS with, these are equivocal. So we really, so there could be, according to the physicalist, on the physicalist own grounds, there could be two different conceptualizations of C. We could conceive of C in phenomenal language, right? So phenomenal concepts take phenomenal states and turn them into concepts of themselves, so on. But if we are physicalists, we can also conceptualize them using physical language, like everything else. We don't know what that physical characterization is, but in principle, we could do that. So let's call the two different conceptualizations C-pen and C-phys. Okay, so now we have four different conditionals that Chalmers presents the proponent, the physicalist with, proponent of the phenomenal concept strategy with. Okay, so we use, so there are two versions of the first condition, two versions of the second, depending on which conceptualization of C we use. Now, the good thing is that two of these we can immediately get rid of. So the physicalists can reasonably hold that one phys and two pen are vacuously true by virtue of having a false antecedent. So that's not going to pose a problem to anybody. So why is that? So one phys said if P and not C phys is conceivable, well, no physical description is conceivably false given the full physical description of the world. If we don't hold that, the whole Chalmers conceivability argument would be out the window anyway. So we can safely assume this. So C phys is, one phys is vacuously true by virtue of having a false antecedent, and similarly to Fen. To Fen says if P and not C Fen is not conceivable, then C Fen cannot explain an epistemic situation. But I just said that C Fen describes phenomenal concepts in phenomenal terms. So if zombies are conceivable, then this is conceivable as well. So we can rule, kind of drop that from our dilemma as well. Okay. So now we have two remaining horns of the dilemma. And what I will say is that they are just perfectly acceptable for the phenomenal realist physicalist of the sort that I am. So here are the remaining horns. If P and not C phys is not conceivable, then C phys cannot explain an epistemic situation. Well, that's okay, because the whole phenomenal concept strategy is to explain why we cannot explain phenomenal experience from what's going on in the brain, even if phenomenal experience is physical. So since C phys is put in a physical way, C phys is not going to be able to explain the various gaps, the gaps between phenomenal and physical descriptions of the world in conceptual, epistemic, and explanatory terms, right? That's the whole starting point of the discussion. So there's nothing here that the proponent of phenomenal concept strategy would be surprised or upset about, or would count against the theory in any way. The same thing is with one Fen. If P and not C Fen is conceivable, then C Fen is not physically explicable. Again, when we put the phenomenal, our theory of phenomenal concepts in phenomenal terms, of course, have I told you what P is? Sorry. So P is the full physical description of the world. I'm sorry. Okay. Somebody should have stopped me. Anyway, so P is the full physical description of the world, and we are talking about what follows from the full physical description of the world. So the one Fen says, if P and not C Fen is conceivable, then C Fen is not physically explicable. So P and not C Fen is conceivable because we put our account of phenomenal concept in phenomenal terms here. And no matter how much physical information we get about the world, it's not good, it's still going to be conceivable that there is no phenomenal concepts described as such, as phenomenal, right? But the antecedent, then C Fen is not physically explicable, is also fine for the physicalist phenomenal realist. Because again, that's the whole idea of the phenomenal concept strategy, that that even though phenomenal experience and now phenomenal concepts that are described in terms of phenomenal experience are not explicable from the physical, they still could be physical. Why? Because of the special cognitive mechanism that we apply on these states. I just feel now, maybe I lost you guys because I never told you what the P was. Any questions? Okay, so what the physicalist here concedes is the existence of epistemic gaps, but it's not for, but the existence of ontological gaps are not forced on the physicalists by these dilemmas that Chalmers proposed. So, in other words, the master argument relies on a failure to allow that a fact can perspicuously explain another fact under one conceptualization, but not under another. So, therefore, the master argument fails to cast any further doubt on the phenomenal concept strategy and any plausibility it has lent by a reliance on those very principles connecting, say, conceivability and possibility that the anti-physicalist arguments employ. Sorry. So the master argument fails to cast any further doubt on the phenomenal concept strategy. And any plausibility that it has just comes from the original principle that was already presented in the conceivability arguments. So it's just another iteration of that very argument. But since the phenomenal concept strategy is trying to refute those principles and has an explanation why those principles are false, nothing is added by the master argument. So Chalmers charges that the explanatory scheme outlined above is circular. That is, that the scheme that the phenomenal concept strategy proponent follows is circular. And in some sense, that's true, because the phenomenal concept strategy starts with the assumption that physicalism is true. And therefore, that those principles that are supposed to show its falsity are false in turn. So to rebut the anti-physicalist arguments, one has to assume that the anti-physicalist principles are false, but it's not a mere vicious circularity, because the account at the same time explains why these principles seem to be true, even though they're mistaken. And I would say that, in fact, Chalmers engages in the same type of circular argumentation that he accuses his opponent. Since he rebuts the phenomenal concept strategy by assuming that the contested principles that the whole debate is about, that they are true. So this argumentative strategy doesn't really add anything new to the debate, just recycles the initial disagreement at the meta level. So this is a stalemate. Each side can unseat the other side's basic assumptions, core assumption, if they are permitted to make their own core assumptions. Both can show that once granted the one core assumption, their view is consistent, and they can respond to any objection from the other side. So, yeah, and what follows is that neither side can, without begging the question against the opponent, show that the other's position is untenable. Now, how does that bear on the question of illusionism versus phenomenal realism? So I say that the physicalists can take this as vindication, or at least at least as license to hold phenomenal realism. The physicalist can respond to any argument the anti-physicalist will throw at him. So there is no reason for the physicalist to give up physicalism. And phenomenal realism. It's just it makes one wonder that while illusionists are willing to entertain the idea that our belief in consciousness is illusory, it doesn't seem to occur to them that the intuitions on which the anti-physicalist arguments rely might be illusory. They might very well be illusory. Okay, so this for the phenomenal concept strategy. So there's another type of argument that is being discussed in favor of illusionism is the debunking arguments. And I will briefly say something about those. So the argument goes like this: there is a correct explanation of our beliefs about consciousness that's independent of consciousness. If there is a correct explanation of our beliefs about consciousness that's independent of consciousness, those beliefs are not justified. And it follows that our beliefs about consciousness are not justified, and so we should go illusionist. So my response will be pretty much the same as it was for the previous argument. The thing that we need to keep in mind to evaluate this argument is, again, that according to the physicalists, there are at least two very different ways in which we can conceptualize phenomenal experience and conscious experience. And so when it comes to beliefs about phenomenal experience, we can think of these beliefs in intentional/phenomenal terms. And in this case, any explanation that does not appeal to consciousness or its cognates will miss the mark. That was the point that I was explaining with regard to the phenomenal concept strategy before, that we have two very different ways of conceptualizing consciousness, and therefore when we think in phenomenal terms, we will not be able to explain what we're talking about in physical terms. So any explanation that doesn't appeal to consciousness or its cognates will miss the mark if we conceptualize beliefs about consciousness in phenomenal terms. On the other hand, one might argue, and I think that François was making this suggestion a few years back, that the physicalists would allow that we could formulate the problem intuitions in purely neuroscientific terms. If physicalism is true, then in principle that should be possible, even though we really have no idea how to do that at the moment, but in principle that should be possible. So, and those facts will be explicable without any reference to consciousness. So maybe QED, but not so fast. When we think about the problem intuitions in suitably physical terms, again, that's a hypothetical that we could do that. Then the fact that we can explain them without explicit appeal to consciousness, phenomenally conceived, will not show that consciousness itself plays no explanatory role, right? Our physical explanation, unbeknownst to us, will appeal to consciousness, but physically conceived in this case. So there is no reason to think that that there could be an explanation of consciousness in any way without appealing to consciousness. So if our beliefs about consciousness are thought about in the common sense phenomenal terms, then premise 1 comes out false. So premise 1 was there is a correct explanation of our beliefs about consciousness that's independent of consciousness. So if we think about consciousness in phenomenal terms, I will submit that's false. On the other hand, if you think about them in physical functional terms, then premise 2 comes out false. Premise 2 is if there is a correct explanation of our beliefs about consciousness that's independent of consciousness, i.e., that doesn't appeal to consciousness as such, then those beliefs are not justified. So as I explained a minute ago, that also doesn't follow. So in that case, premise 2 comes out false. So the argument really doesn't go through because you have to choose between these two interpretations, and in each interpretation, one of the premises is false. Well, so I think I skip a little bit here. Okay, so my summary of this, these dialectics. So there are the two major arguments that have been marshaled for illusionism, and I think that neither of these arguments really work. And so granted, we could philosophy and science with philosophy sometimes goes against deeply held common sense views. I don't dispute that, and there are many examples of that. Is like the nature of physical objects or causation or the nature of the self or free will, all of that. But the case of experience is different from that. First of all, as I was trying to show, there is really no good philosophical reasons to deny it. So yeah, I mean, there are no philosophical arguments to deny it, and there are no real scientific reasons either to go against it. So it's not like these other cases where we had some very weighty reasons to go against what dearly held and cherished items of common sense. The phenomenal realism to the illusionism case really doesn't clear that bar at all. Okay, so that was my rebuttal part, and so now I would like to say something about why illusionism makes me triggers me and makes me uneasy. And that's because I think that metaphysical beliefs are not morally neutral or harmless, and this is an example where they're not. So even if the connection between metaphysical belief and evaluative attitude is not a rational one, there are still complicated psychological connections between them. For example, if you look at everyone as a creature of God, it might be easier at that point to feel some empathy for others. On the other hand, if you cease believing in consciousness altogether, even if it doesn't end all concern and care for one's or life of others, it might still alter one's relationship to them. So Ian Hacking calls that the looping effect. The process by which one's emotions, aspirations, principles, and values are shaped and channeled by social understanding and labeling. which in turn dramatically affect their expression and manifestation. And so I think that with the case of illusionism, if you think that it's just a piece of metaphysics and it will stay within the four walls of academia, these debates, I'm not sure that that's really right. And if you think that it's okay to, like who was saying it, that the British monarchy, that there's this mistaken belief that the British monarchy would cause no harm, that you can keep it around and sorry? Right. Okay, thank you. So illusionism might be also, trading on this assumption that it causes no harm. But I don't know. I mean, the other day I had a student in a class that I teach on the South, and she raised her hand and she said, I know that this is not what we're discussing, but I'm a neuroscience major and I just come from a class. And my teacher just told us that there is no such thing as a mind. Do you think that's true? That was just last week. And I was really laughing hard because I was thinking of coming to this conference. so I was saying, yeah, okay, I have an opinion about that. But I think that it's, illusionism really is becoming much more part of popular culture and just the general way of how we think about ourselves. So the looping effect. So for example, if I'm told that I'm not conscious, then chances are that I'm not gonna attach that much importance to my conscious states. Well, why? If there, if there are no such things, why would I try to explore them or contemplate them or think about them much at all? So another example, so I'm sort of, I realize it's more like anecdotal evidence that I'm trying to marshal here, but I was, I have a friend who teaches a class on meditation at UCLA in a secular setting, not a Buddhist setting, but it's more or less Buddhist meditation. And I was sort of TAing, during the pandemic for one of these classes, and I had a group of students who, I met with regularly, and so they were, their questions were like, okay, can you guarantee that if I go through with this, my prefrontal cortex will be measurably thicker by the end of this? And I was kind of taken aback a little bit because I've been trained in meditation, and the idea of meditation is not taught in terms of thickening brain or anything like that, but in terms of self-awareness and self-control and virtue and whatnot. But now it seems like people started getting a way of thinking about this in terms of like scientific third-person ways about their own mind that they're dealing with while they're dealing with as their own mind. So it's remarkable, I think. So I think that when we start seeing ourselves as information processors rather than full-blooded human beings, and I think that we can think about ourselves as both. But if it becomes like just that, we are these information processors, our brains do this and that and the other thing, and that's the end of it. Then it's easier to see ourselves like people normally see robots as unfeeling meaningless creatures and our life without, significance. From that point of view, of course, everybody has access to the first person point of view from which significance and meaning and all of that appears, but so I just want to close with some ideas which I know are controversial about the connection between value and experience. And so I invite you to think about Zombie Mary. So Zombie Mary is a super intelligent organism, but she lacks any feeling or experience. So there are no phenomenal experiences, just like Frank thinks we are like. I mean, minus being so intelligent. So this Zombie Mary could know a tremendous amount about humans, but she wouldn't have the introspective understanding normal humans have because she doesn't have experience. And so, for example, if she witnesses horrible things like bloody murder, and she wouldn't have any feeling about it, either pro or con. She would be just without any, she would be just neutral, wouldn't have any feeling one way or another about that. And so I submit that in this case, Zombie Mary would really know nothing about value, meaning, and human significance. A creature who doesn't have experience just cannot have an understanding of what value is. So nothing could be beautiful or attractive or horrifying to her. And one could argue that this deficit of hers would extend to moral notions as well. But if illusionism is right, we are like such creatures, right? But we are not. So I think I will stop here, okay? Thank you very much.